Hello, welcome to There Will Always Be Another Book. Today I am talking about Vladimir Nabokov's Ardor or Ardor, which I finished just like an hour ago, I guess. I finished the book, wrote some notes for what I want to talk about in this video, but general impressions is that this book is a 5-star book, 5 out of 4 stars. I was so seriously impressed that I'm going to say a maybe controversial statement in that to preface the controversial statement, Nabokov is my favorite author. Lolita was the first book that I ever read that impressed on me the gravity, foreshadowing for gravity, the gravity of how deep a book can be, and Pale Fire is my personal favorite of Nabokov's works. But I think Ardor or Ardor is Nabokov's best. His best book that I've read so far, and you owe it to yourself to go and read it. The reason I'm singing its praises so quickly is because I do want to talk about a lot of different approaches that Nabokov takes and a lot of devices and things that he explores throughout the novel, and the only way I can the only way that I want to do that is by jumping around, and so there will be spoilers. So if I hope I've impressed onto you the gravity, again, foreshadowing, of how much I enjoy this novel. So please go and check it out if you haven't already. If you like Nabokov, you will hopefully love this as well. And so, oh my god, so I just noticed a note as well to rant about Penguin Classics covers. This is not related to Nabokov at all, but I have a lot of these Penguin, actually I can't show you an example because the books are being used as a stand for the microphone, but I have a lot of these Nabokov Penguin Classics covers which feature these like beautiful paintings by Meredith Hampton, but every time I look at them I'm just like, ugh, they're so whatever. It's just like, I don't know, it's sort of like, it's literally like if you just, went to listen to some famous impressionist music like Debussy or something, and they just put up pictures of Starry Night, and it's like, okay, they're both impressionist, they're both like intricately detailed from an older period, but there's no connection between them, and like I don't even think Ada really looks like this. But anyway, the Lose in Defense one is bad as well. The one for Lolita, it gets some points for not having a like 10-year-old girl on the cover, but it's still not great. Yeah, sorry for that tangent. Just wanted to rant about these Penguin Classics covers because I don't like them. But anyway, moving on to the aforeshadowed gravity. So I feel bad because I feel like I've mentioned Gravity's Rainbow in like every video that I've made since starting reading it. But I do want to talk about it, and I kind of do have to talk about it for this book because the reason I started reading Ada was that I had just read Gravity's Rainbow, and I was reading online that Pynchon was, around the time he was writing Gravity's Rainbow, attending lectures from Nabokov and learning how to write, or not learning how to write, but just going and learning from the man himself. And also that people were saying that the structure of Ardor or Ardor was it was similar when Pynchon did Gravity's Rainbow. There is kind of technically 4 parts in each book. There is a part 5 in this, which is like a it's funny, I think in other Nabokov books he would have called it an epilogue, but in this one it's actually definitely just part 5, which I like, but it feels like an epilogue, and it's kind of set like that. I didn't feel the Gravity's Rainbow influence at first when I was reading it. Really, the first 250 something pages of the book. Well, actually, I guess I know it's until this first blue tag are devoted to the two main characters, Ada and Veen, and they're just like kind of. At this point, again, I'm assuming that you've read it, but just in case, pretty much this book is a love story, but in typical Nabokovian twistedness, the main character Ivan, there's two sets of parents for Ada and Ivan, and there's Aqua and Marina, right? And then there's Dementi, who's just called Demon, and Daniel. Aqua and Marina are twins who were born in 1844, and Dementi and Daniel, or Demon and Daniel, are also twins who were born in 1838, and each of them had a child with the other twin. So, like, Van and Ada are technically first cousins, but they'd actually literally just be siblings. And so the first part, again, I'm going to get back to this family tree because this is also super important. The first part of the novel, the first 250 pages, is just devoted to Van and Ada falling in love at their kind of family house, or at one of their family houses. I think it's Marina's family house, which is Ada's mother. And it's honestly really touching, and it reminded me a lot of Nabokov's autobiography. I was still enjoying it, but I was a little bit like, I don't know how Pinchonian this feels, until this first pink tag, which is where, if I recall correctly, it's a part of the novel where Van is going on a kind of revenge, not really revenge, but like hunting down and trying to challenge two suitors of Ada who, they're just because of reasons, Russian aristocracy pride or whatever. And up until this point, I had not really read or seen much of the Pynchon-esque, like, sort of beat writing, and Nabokov is really into unreliable narrators, which I will definitely get into shortly. But this paragraph right here on page 228 was the first one where I was just like, whoa, he's really writing like very in like the present moment, taking short sentences to like just things that short sentences to describe what the character would be saying or what would be feeling. Honestly, it's just going to be easier if I read it. So he watched his thoughts revolve, dance, strut, clown a little. He found it delightful to imagine, for instance, that a cake of soap must be solid ambrosia to the ants swarming over it, and what a shock to be drowned in the midst of that orgy. Super Nabokovian. The code, he reflected, did not allow to challenge a person who was not born a gentleman, but exceptions might be made for artists, pianists, flutists. Right. And if a coward refused, you could make his gums bleed with repeated slaps, or, better still, thrash him with a strong cane. Must not forget to choose one in the vestibule closet before leaving forever. Forever. Great fun. He relished as something quite special and kind of... He relished as something quite special the kind of one-legged jig a naked fellow performs when focusing on the shorts he tries to get into. He sauntered through the side gallery. He ascended the grand staircase. Blah 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 blah. But I read that and I was like, "Whoa, what is happening?" Like, Nabokov is really, really flexing his style. And at this part of the novel, the writing becomes incredibly Van-centric, and I'll get into that when I talk about the unreliable narratorness. But nevertheless, as the novel progresses, it gets even more. It experiments with some more things. There's an entire, like, part 4 is more or less an entire philosophical writing on the nature of time that Nabokov was actually writing. I believe it was called Texture of Time. And Nabokov was writing textures of time and letters from Terra that both show up in this book. And also, just a quick note on the setting. This book is set on a place called Anti-Terra that is a lot like Earth, except that there's just like miscellaneous differences that I won't actually go into because I don't remember them that much, and I'll just like copy paste it from Wikipedia and put it in the description. But one of the big things is just that a lot of America was occupied by Russians, and like everyone in America just speaks Russian, French, and English fluently. And there are some areas like northern parts of Canada are like Russian areas. And it was actually like, because I was kind of politely ignoring those differences, I was like, I don't really get this, but I'm just going to move on, and it very much seems like normal, until it got to some parts where Van becomes a psychologist, and he starts to learn and talk about and study people who are having hallucinations about Terra, which is like the real Earth. And so at that point I was like, okay, I think I need to look this up and find out what's happening. So yeah, I will say if you don't understand it, it doesn't get in the way of the novel. It's just a kind of funny way of explaining why everyone can speak Russian, French, and English. And is a pretty good analogy or allegory, I guess, for just the emigre culture of Nabokov moving to America, and having his culture but in a foreign place. But anyway, that's the setting of the novel. Parts of the novel I've written to talk about, but again, I will get to that when I talk about unreliable narrator. One thing I wanted to point out as well is that this novel, more than any that I've read, has really shown me Nabokov's Joycean influence. And there's so much fun wordplay that Nabokov likes to, he likes to experiment, especially in the first chapter when the wordplay is bouncing off Van and Ada, and they're having a lot of fun. There's this entire 5-page section of them playing Scrabble, and it's just so great. But the first just outright Joycean thing that I noticed is something that happens in the second part. And I wish I remembered an example from The Portrait of the Artist, but this is something that I've definitely seen Joyce do a lot in Portrait of the Artist, and maybe also in Dubliners. But it's this idea of using adjectives or adverbs right next to each other. And I'll just read an example. So, beneath it, on a rump-tickling coarse couch, Van reclined, pouting pensively caressing the pretty head on his chest, flooded by the black hair of a blah, 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 blah. That pouting pensively caressing, that was such a nice, when I read Joyce do it, it always feels so sort of masterful. How did you figure out exactly how to use an adjective or an adverb just twice in a row, right next to each other, and it didn't seem, outrageous or absurd? And I can tell that it's probably quite risky to do because, the bright or the lovely just reeks of disgustingly amateur. And I think that's the only time when Nabokov specifically uses two of the identical words right next to each other, which is kind of funny thinking about, the themes of the book. But Joyce is an absolute master of that, and he does it a couple of times in his works, and it's always delightful. All right, it's about time that I just get into talking about the unreliable narrator, because there are a couple of definitely just obvious unreliable narrators. Probably the one that everyone will, without a doubt, notice is during the scene describing Lucette's death on the boat. The Tobakov, and Van, who is writing at this point, goes through this intricate kind of description of how Lucette died, and then at the end, I'm just like, how does he know any of this? But this is a very typical Nabokov device, and he uses it a lot. He uses it a lot in Pale Fire, and he uses it in Lolita as well. And I really love that there's a bit of self-referentialism where right after Lucette dies, and there's this entire kind of section where Van is talking about how she died as if he would possibly know. Van writes a letter to his father and is saying, just talking about what happened and saying, just for your own edification, Lucette was never my mistress, as an obscene ass whom I cannot trace implies in the write-up of this tragedy, because people were reporting on the death. And then he writes a long letter to Ada, just describing everything. And I absolutely loved how his father responded to him and just said, I do not give a damn whether you slept or not with Lucette, but I know from Dorothy Vinelander that the child had been in love with you. Blah, 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 blah. Sorry. I'm trying to find where he talked about it. Yeah, here we go. Your epistolary style is so involute that I should suspect the presence of code had I not known you belonged to the decadent school of writing in the company of naughty old Leo and consumptive Anton. I just thought that was so funny. But to continue with the theme of the unreliable narrator, I want to posit a hypothesis with this book that is not necessarily true. And if reading Gravity's Rainbow has taught me anything, it's that like a book can just literally be about lots of different things, and you can have different interpretations of it, and they can actually all be equally valid and rewarding. But one of the interpretations that I want to make about this book is that there is a lot of just outright deception and lying that happens. So firstly, back to that family tree that I mentioned, the book talks about how this book, Ada or Ardor, which it is called that in this book's part 5, is not meant to be published until after the death of Van. But in the family tree, we notice that neither of Van nor Ada have written down death dates. Furthermore, this family tree is just actually wrong, because in part 1 we find out that Van and Ada, through miscellaneous affairs and shenanigans and hooligans and heartbreak and terribleness, are actually brother and sister, and that Lucette, who we thought is Ada's sister, is actually her half-sister, or I think Nabokov uses the term uterine sister. So this family tree is just wrong. But it's also a family tree that is not written by Vladimir Nabokov. This is a family tree that's written by Van. It's part of the novel. And with that in mind, we also see that, with the exception of Mr. and Mrs. Ronald Oranger, a few incidental figures, and some non-American citizens, all persons mentioned by name in this book are dead. E.D. You would find out by the end, by part 5, that this is a note written by Violet Knox, who is Mrs. Ronald Oranger, and whose name is... Okay, one, her name is so fake that you can't take it seriously even for Nabokov, and two, she's introduced in the final part, and if this is meant to be a memoir that's been kind of dictated by Van while living with Ada and written by this lady, Violet Knox, you would think that any trace of it would have come up before. But my suspicion, and I'm more than willing to be pointed to loopholes and plot holes to prove this wrong, is that the book is actually being written at the time that all of the events in it are occurring. And the one standout reason that I'm saying this is that one of the very charming things about the book is about the part 1 of the book are these parenthetical interruptions from Ada or Van, And there are times where Van will be writing, but then Ada will say, "Oh, no," and she'll give an opinion in the brackets. Sometimes Van will actually stop writing and Ada will take over and start writing. And it seems in hindsight to me that that's something that could only have actually been possible during the times when they were actually together at the family estate. And of course, in this part 2 and part 3 of the novel, which are focused solely on Van, there wouldn't be any interjections from Ada, but there's also never any more from Ada throughout the entire course of the book, even when they get back together. And part 5 also talks about one of these beautiful things of starts to just break down our conception of Van and Ada. Their names start getting like kind of playfully mixed up in the same sort of puns that happened before when they were young. Nabokov in part 5 makes an explicit mention of the blurb of the book, which, if we jump to the back, Ada or Ardor is a romance that follows Ada from her first childhood meeting with Van Veen, VV, Vladimir Vladimirovich, anyway, on his uncle's country estate, so sorry I got that one wrong, in dream bright America, through 80 years of rapture as they cross continents, are continually parted and reunited, come to learn the strange truth about their singular relationship. What do you mean? They knew that straight away. Well, I guess the coming to learn the strange truth would be that they're actually siblings. And decades later, put their extraordinary experiences into words. This book does not. This book follows Van. It's explicitly about Van, and so you cannot take that seriously at all. There are times when they talk about how the characters Van and Ada get absorbed into the prose of the novel, which was such a funny back to another Pynchonian idea of, Tyra and Slothrop in the end of Gravity's Rainbow, just like, again, spoiler for that book, sorry, didn't want to say that, just disintegrating into like an indeterminate state of particles or whatever. Yeah, so fascinating. This book is, I will admit that I was a little bit disappointed at first because I was like, man, I'm expecting some cookedness, and the first part was just some nice wholesome stuff, and but it really delivered. It really, like, after the moment, I think part 4 and part 5 really just ramp everything up. Sorry, I'm just taking a look at my notes. Yep, the opening line and notes by Vivian Darkbloom. So anyone who's a fan of Nabokov should know that Vivian Darkbloom is a moniker or pseudonym for Vladimir Nabokov. And so if you've read anything else by Nabokov and you see notes by Vivian Darkbloom or a interjection or a comment or a preface by Vivian Darkbloom, you need to read that as well, because that is part of the novel. And it's Nabokov, but it's kind of also not, right? And so the reason I wrote this down is one of the first things that any reader, actually literally the first thing that any reader will notice when you start the novel is the opening line, part 1. All happy families are more or less dissimilar. All unhappy ones are more or less alike, says a great Russian writer in the beginning of a famous novel. Anna, sorry, you're going to have to forgive me for this. Cannot speak Russian. Anna Arkadievich Karenina, transfigured into English by R.J. Stonelauer, Mount Tabor, Ltd., 1880. And then that pronouncement has little, if anything, has little, if any, relation to the story to be unfolded now, a family chronicle, the first part of which is perhaps closer to another Tolstoy work, Childhood and Fatherland, Pontius Press, 1858. And so, reading that and thinking about that, you might be like, imagine the audacity of starting your novel with the great opening line from another classic Russian novel. And if it was anyone else except Vladimir Nabokov, I would have continued to think that. However, as we know from this book, Nabokov is no stranger himself to coming up with legendary book titles. And so at first, I thought that it was an intentional kind of placement just to make the reader aware that like this is going to be an extremely self-referential book, or referential, or self-referential, but referencing literature as well, and it's not a book that's meant to be taken on its own. However, notes to Ada, Vivian Darkbloom, part 1, or page 1, all happy families, etc., etc. Mistranslations of Russian classics are ridiculed here. The opening sentence of Tolstoy's novel is turned inside out, and Anna Arkadyevna, is patronymic, given an absurd masculine ending, while an incorrect feminine one is added to her surname. Mount Tabor and Pontius allude to the transfigurations, M.G. Steiner's term, I believe, and betrayals to which great texts are subjected by pretentious and ignorant versionists. And so it's very important to go and read the notes because it will contextualize a lot of things. And fortunately as well, the notes provide a lot of translations because there is a lot of French in this book. Weirdly enough, a lot of the Russian is just translated immediately in brackets, but a lot of the French you will either need to do some strategic Google translating, or better yet, just consult the appendage by Vivian Darkbloom. I'm wondering if there's anything else I wanted to mention. Oh yeah, the length of each part as a reflection of how memory works as we get older. So this is something that's actually talked about by Nabokov in the book, or by Van in the book, I guess, where he points out the fact that if you're 9 years old, then 1 year of your life you've become 10, and so that 1 year was a tenth of your life. But when you're 60, when you're 59 becoming 60, 1 year is a 60th of your life. So in terms of just pure ratio, like those earlier parts of your life occupy so much more of your memory of what your life is. And that's actually kind of reflected in this book where, you know, the first part of it, like the first 200-ish pages, are all devoted to Van being around the age of 18. And by the end of the book, he's in his 90s. So yeah, that's another nice little kind of structural compositional device that I very much enjoyed. And one last thing that I wanted to point out, touching moments that often get forgotten in Nabokov's work. I need to find this because there's something that's so, you know, we always talk about Nabokov as having this absolutely delicious prose that you can read, and to give an alternative example of his incredible prose, I'm going to go and read a section where Van is on the Tobakov, the transatlantic cruise on which Lucette dies. And also, again, there's a hilarious little joke that's in part 5 where Van says that he, like Ada, he also swept Lucette off her feet. It's kind of funny. But anyway, he's talking about trying to get some sleep, but you know, the vessel is rocking and whatnot. And let me read this. So this is not the touching part. This is just classic Nabokov delightful prose. A tempest went into convulsions around midnight, but despite the lunging and creaking, Tobakov was an embittered old vessel, Van managed to sleep soundly, the only reaction on the part of his dormant mind being the dream image of an aquatic peacock slowly sinking before somersaulting like a diving grebe near the shore of the lake bearing his name in the ancient kingdom of Arrowroot. I have no idea what any of that means. Upon reviewing that bright dream, he traced its source to his recent visit to Armenia, where he had gone fowling with Ardor and that gentleman's extremely compliant and accomplished niece. He wanted to make a note of it, and was amused to find that all 3 pencils had not only left his bed table, but had neatly aligned themselves head to tail along the bottom of the outer door of the adjacent room, having covered quite a stretch of blue carpeting in the course of their stopped escape. And that is just like, oh man, it's so like, you know, if you're given a brief, if you want to explain to somebody what prose is, if someone who's not a reader, like doesn't know what prose is, just be like, you know, describe somebody trying to sleep in a room on a rickety boat, and just give them that, and then see what they come up with, and then give them this, and compare the pair. But the beautiful, touching part that I wanted to talk about happens when, after this has all happened, here we go. After Lucette had passed away, Van goes back to meet Ada again, and because coincidentally both Lucette and Van's father Demon died very in the span of a short period of time. They both happen in part 3, and there's this like really kind of butterflies in your stomach moment where even though she's married, Van sees Ada again, and blah blah blah, she gets introduced, and he was trying to form a succinct sentence to warn her about the device he planned for securing a rendezvous, but she interrupted his throat clearing with a muttered injunction, and then in Russian she says, "That mustache must go," and turned away to lead him to the far corner from which she had taken so many years to reach him. And oh, that's such a beautiful line. Oh my god. Like it can sometimes feel cheesy when someone like Nabokov tries to write something like really genuinely heartfelt, but I think that that's a misconception actually, and I think that Nabokov can really write seriously touching moments. And back to Lolita, there's a lot is talked about in this novel, but if I remember, one of the most impactful moments that I had in this book, and it's one that stayed with me, is Humbert and Lolita are on their, they're driving around America because they've already been, he's already preyed upon her, and they've got this just kind of terrible symbiotic relationship where he's trying to do anything to keep her happy within certain limitations, so they're just driving around from tourist point to tourist point. And there's this part where Humbert just like looks at her, and she's just so like broken and sad and dejected, and he feels it. And I was just like, fuck man, Nabokov is dropping some real shit, and I think those beautiful moments can really get overlooked in Nabokov's novels. I've talked for so long about this book, Ada or Ardor. I'm going to need to call it here. Just quickly triple checking my notes to make sure I didn't miss anything. Please tell me what you thought about this book. I adored it. Oh my god, I can't believe I made that pun. Anyway, remember to keep on reading. There will always be another book. I'll see you in the next video. Depends the order I'm reading, but I think I'm going to start reading The Crying of Lot 49. That's on my radar to read next. But thank you again for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.